You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
What physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the game. I watched the game.
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Weemuth, welcoming you to episode 9, The Transfer Portal. The tip of the iceberg, how the transfer portal is evolving in college basketball. Recorded on the evening of April 27th, 2024. So, Bob, I'm stuck here in Philly, so I can't obviously get back home. How are things back in Indiana this lovely spring? I saw the Little Five went off without a hitch.
Little Five went off without a hitch around the same time as the spring football game, which I think a bunch of us watched really for the first time in quite a long time.
True.
That spring game, there's a lot of excitement going in with what Coach Sig's bringing to the program, and watching it was a very interesting game to say the least. We could definitely tell that they're moving in a good direction.
Yeah, exactly.
And Little Five's always a thing. Classes and also classes just ended, so now we're going to have commencement, I believe, next week. So we're going into finals week in Bloomington. But nice. Little Five was pristine.
Awesome. Yeah, congrats to Kappa Alpha Theta and the Black Key Bulls on winning the women's and men's races. My sister is actually a Theta, so I'm a little bit biased towards that team every year. So
I remember I was always liking Thetas. They were
exactly. I was jealous of them because they had, I think, the best location for a living at IU. I mean, literally, you could just stumble out of your place and be at the Union in 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's a prime spot, to say the least.
Yeah.
So congratulations to the teams and all the participants, because it's a heck of a lot of work and an amazing accomplishment just to be a part of that incredible event.
Yep, exactly.
And I know that you're noticing this because, we talk about it frequently. The transfer portal is in full swing. IU is making some serious moves that I think we should be excited about. I know that I'm excited. I think we both are pretty excited and definitely thinking more of the top end.
Yeah.
But it is a transfer portal, which is this brand new, when we say brand new, less than 5 years, about 3 years of this sort of free movement of players moving in and out, and a bit of a fog of war going on, don't you think?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And it's it's because it's so new and because so much is moving at the same time. It is a little bit like two tornadoes are coming and converging at the same time, especially when you throw NIL in at the same time. So it's a little tricky, but obviously we'll be walking through that slowly over the course of the next few weeks. And I think you and I have talked about this before. One thing I will say I do like about the portal is that it comes right on the heels of the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. So all the roster construction lessons of the tournament are not easily forgotten. Because I know how many times I've probably complained to you directly in decades past about how
yes.
How many people watch the tournament and then they would realize, oh crap, this is what good teams look like. And you'd hope that all those lessons would carry on into recruiting season. But since high school players in the olden days tend to, commit closer to the fall, mm-hmm. I noticed that by the time we got to late May, all of that insight would be memory hold. It was
mm-hmm.
by the time you get to the Indy 500, a kind of cosmic reset button was pressed and the cycle would just repeat itself again. So the great thing about the portal is just that whole that time interval has just basically converged. So now, right after the tournament is over, the portal is taking place, and those lessons are kind of sticking now when you're bringing in players.
Well, and again, it's a quicker turnaround in all possible ways. That you're talking about. It's not like you're looking at guys that are maybe at this point going to be a year out. Like when you start talking about the class of 2025 commits, they're a year away from coming on campus. And as we know, they're usually, in the vast preponderance of cases, at least another 2, closer to 3 years before they're significant contributors.
Yeah.
So now you have a situation where you can immediately address a need that you have. The trade-off is you get another need. Needs may pop up unexpectedly on your team or on your roster.
Yeah.
But I think you throw in you mentioned the NIL portion. There's also the COVID year right now. We're going to talk a lot about this over the next few months going into the season, trying to figure out, okay, what's exactly going on and how are programs responding to this? How are programs driving it? And what we think the results are.
Yep, exactly.
And much like whenever, IndyCar, you brought up, the Indianapolis 500 usually being one of those benchmark points where, hope springs eternal. People start thinking over the summer, let's get some player reports coming in from summer workouts, that sort of, those sorts of stories. Much like the Indy 500 was, I would say 25 years ago when you started noticing, how different racing teams would configure themselves. Different programs are going to do the same thing. And you're going to have the Penske's, you're going to have the Ganassis out there, where now it's pretty much all corporate. But back in those times, it was definitely you had those individuals, but you also had Dick Simon Racing out there where you had a guy that was mortgaging his house to make the race. He brought in like 7 dudes from the local Jiffy Lube to be his pit crew.
Skipping some children's vaccinations, to bring as much cash in.
It was seriously, these guys would put a lot on the line to try to make the race. And I remember one time Jerry Unser, who was a driver, Jerry Sneva, not Jerry Unser. Jerry Sneva told me once years ago, if you qualified for Indy back in the late 70s, you could run the entire kart circuit. So it was worth everybody's financial worthwhile to do so.
Sure.
So you have different goals. Like some of these goals are going to be to win the race. Other goals are to make the race so they can run a full season, so they can do what they love. Much like a lot of programs are. You only have a few programs that are gunning for national titles. A slightly larger number whose ultimate, championship winning belt mindset is a Final Four.
Mm-hmm.
Other programs where it's making a tournament or winning your conference tournament was, to get that 12 seed. So much like IndyCar was in those times, you're seeing that happening inside college basketball. And speaking of IndyCar, our good friends at Home Field have something very exciting that they're launching here on Friday of this week.
I saw that, yeah. The 16-piece drop, I heard, right?
All dedicated to the glorious Indianapolis Motor Speedway, of which Mike and I, being, guys in our 40s who grew up in Indiana, remember there were 3 seasons in Indiana. There was nothing, IU basketball, and then the Indianapolis 500. And after that, you went into the summer, and you followed baseball. Like I still am a big Reds fan, but, there was that period of time where it's like, Indiana felt like it was on the map from October 1st through Memorial Day for a reason.
Exactly.
You being from Terre Haute, there's some connections there, I believe.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, as a Trout native, I was, I guess, extremely lucky to be in the same town as the Holman family, who owned the racetrack, and we always had good tickets to the race. I used to joke that the seats around the start-finish line might as well have been a Terre Haute Chamber of Commerce group photo, given how generous the ticket allocations were for Hoshians back in the day. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the Home Field drop. Knowing how well they handled the Jeff Gordon 1990s vintage, race NASCAR gear. I'm pretty sure the stuff they're releasing on May 3rd is going to be like equally cool. So definitely make sure to check out the Home Field website for that coming up.
So if you want to go back, like Mike went to the race, I now go to the race and run to the Good Doctor every once in a while in the area at an undisclosed location. If you want to go back to the days where if you were like me and you didn't get tickets to the race because your dad didn't work for Cummins or one of the automotive companies, or mom, you swung the antenna south in Columbus because my parents also didn't have cable, and you picked up the Louisville channels.
That's right.
You could get it on WHAS out of Louisville, and I do recall the Delta Force opening, where they would actually, to start the broadcast, they would play the theme of the Delta Force.
Really?
Paul Page. Oh yeah. Amazing. Just that high techno beat blasting the music going at you.
Wait, the Lee Marvin movie?
Lee Marvin, Chuck Norris. Got it. Yeah. Knocking off, basically, as an anti-terrorist unit.
Is that the one where they have the rockets built on the motorcycles? Is that correct?
They did. At the end, when Chuck takes care of the main terrorist, he's doing it with some with rockets on the back of like a ninja motorcycle, blasting into that thing and doing wheelies. And it's just, again, when we talk about home field, a lot of it's almost like talking about Star Wars toys. It just takes us back to a time when life was simpler, a heck of a lot of fun. Yeah. And all your hopes and dreams are going to come true every single year because it was just a time of glory. Because after IU wins a national championship, Rockford comes to the track, and that's about as good as you were going to get in Indiana in the mid 80s.
Exactly.
So www.homefieldapparel.com. Check it out and get your orders in because the race is coming.
Awesome. Great. All right, Bob. Should we jump right in? Let's get right into the portal, as they say.
Let's start talking about this, and let's kind of go with the lead-in construct that I think sometimes we talk about the portal, Mike. I think because we're so personally invested in our institutions and we love our school, we love IU in our case so much, but most everybody, it's kind of the same thing of why. The first thing we have to kind of get over, and what we're going to kind of be touching on throughout this whole process, will be why would a kid ever want to leave my school? Why would a kid want to walk away from Indiana basketball, or in the case of
ISU with all the kids.
ISU with all the kids leave. It's like after you built something special. Why we've talked about why the coach would want to leave. Just from a financial standpoint, I think people kind of understand that on definitely a business level in some respects. But this whole idea that that it's all about one thing or all about something else. I do think there are misconceptions and myths when we're going into the portal. I think the first one is that this is something brand new, that this idea of transfers in college basketball or basketball in general, even high school basketball, is a new concept. I think you and I were talking about a reference in our favorite non-documentary basketball movie.
Exactly. Yeah. The movie Hoosiers even had a version of the portal in that. Remember that first practice scene? I think Buddy says to Whit, let's fly this chicken coop. Didn't you say you want to be a Terhune anyway? So yeah, that's I remember even like hearing that the first time. I was like, wow, you could just transfer like that,
They talked about Jimmy Chitwood also, in the barbershop about transfer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was like, that's true. So even in the sainted time frame of when Hoosiers was based upon, there was transfers taking place.
Kids would leave schools for a variety of reasons. I ain't no gizzard. But there was another part, there was also, high profile players, even in the 70s and 80s. Kyle Macy transferring, a Peru graduate, goes to West Lafayette, kind of rethinks what he's doing there. Joby Hall down at Kentucky is there, and he looks at an opportunity, and so he transfers, and then he and Jack Gibbons go and win a national championship in 1978 with obviously a lot of help. But Kyle Macy, as an example, sits out the year. Delray Brooks leaving Indiana in the mid 80s. Ricky Callaway right after that. So that kind of sandwich in between the 1987 title, you had that movement of players, or the exodus of players in the 90s that we remember with Collier, Reed, and Luke Recker. And it's never, and usually it was seen more as not a good fit, or the program may move like a Marty Simmons situation where maybe we want to move, he needs to maybe go to play for Jim Cruz down in Evansville versus playing, in a power conference, a contending conference, or contending team in a power conference. But you had the 1 year drag, where you had, they would drag out that, they had to sit out that year, which was usually used as a red shirt. And then they could play, they get eligibility after a year of sitting out. A lot of that was true also on the high school level too, where, you could appeal certain things, but it was always, that the graduate transfer started a few years back. We got Max Bielfeldt out of that, I believe, among others. But next was it Zeisloff? Was he a grad transfer?
I think, was he third year from he's over from Illinois. Yeah,
Illinois State.
I'm trying to remember or Bradley or wherever he was from. Yeah, I don't quite remember what his status was, but yeah, I mean, I think he was. Yeah, I mean, he was definitely towards the end of his career either way. So, but yeah, no, it's true. It's like this thing's always kind of been here. I guess that's the point, right? I think maybe what really sort of changes about the portal now versus the way things have operated with the traditional transfer route is just the frequency. There's just like so many players now versus in the past where it's just like much lower frequency for teams. And I think
that's about incentivization, right? I mean, you no longer have a disincentive to stay at your school
if you're not. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting if you think about it, is like how many players wanted to leave in the olden days, but they couldn't because they were disincentivized because of the 1 year sit out rule. So it's it does make you kind of think like, wow, players now just they can get to where they think they need to as far as like their basketball career, which is great. You always think about like, man, like in the past you would see players on teams that seem a little bit disgruntled and you thought like maybe they want to leave but they can't because they just can't give up that 1 year of staying on the court and actually like playing, which is obviously like what most players are looking for. So yeah, I to me it's almost like a deregulated market that happens after an overregulated market. And so we're kind of finding sort of like an equilibrium point in terms of like players like flowing in and out, where they probably should have, maybe the inflow and outflow is different, but it's probably more the natural default setting for players' desires. And obviously with the COVID year and all that, that's going to equilibrate at some point. But we're just in one of those chaos periods at the moment, unfortunately.
Right. And you're touching on kind of the second myth I want to kind of get into too, which is the portal's a one-way street. Like we talk about dissatisfied players and players not wanting to be at a school. There is the coach sits a kid down and says, son, you're not going to play here. Usually sometimes it's after the freshman year. Oftentimes it's more after that sophomore year where both sides usually by that point have kind of got a pretty good understanding that maybe this location isn't going to be their final destination. Mm-hmm. And now that there's not a disincentive of a kid losing a year, I think it's easier for a coach to kind of be like, okay, this situation, you need here's our plan for you, and we're pretty sure it's not going to line up with what your plan for yourself is. Yeah. And we'll put a good word in for you. Or, we'll, you go in good graces is kind of the best way to look at it. Yeah. I would hope in most cases that's the case, but it's kind of, I think another big misnomer is that we look at a kid and we're like, oh, well, he's not getting playing time. He's not very happy here. We know he's going to transfer. When in reality, it sometimes is a mutual decision, or in some cases, it may just be the program looks at him and says, you're not going to play. Your only chance of getting in is going to be the portal. And if you want more NIL opportunities, potentially it could be somewhere else. And it's one of those areas where it doesn't matter what level you're at. Sometimes you have to have the uncomfortable conversation with a kid and a family. Your son didn't hit his growth spurt like we were hoping.
Yeah.
And exactly. It sucks running into them at the local supermarket. It really,
with the awkward conversation.
Decade later, it still sucks because how much, and the kid was having a great time. But it was just a point where we're not doing anybody any favors here. And it's unfair for us to ask you to continue. There's a better fit for you somewhere else. And it's true at every level of the game in many respects. When you start talking about when you have to start cutting kids or start moving around, you have to make some difficult decisions. Yeah. And this is one of those, I think, as well. Yeah. That coaches have to make a call.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you think about the change. It's in the prior era, it was like player progression was almost a little bit like it's like the United Auto Workers. Like kids sat as freshmen, sophomores, but started as juniors and seniors as they gained seniority. And as long as you were improving generally, there was some degree of job security on the roster for you. Playing time competition only really existed like laterally and down. Like you only had to worry about like competing against the players in your own class or the class prior to. So there was never really any threat from players at your level or up coming in from outside to steal your minutes away on the team. But of course, that was, it was such a norm back then that, you think about like on message boards and other places, people would fret about kids getting quote unquote recruited over.
Yeah.
If there was like an instant impact player that was, added to the roster. I mean, there was actually a term for it that people are so worried about. In the portal era, that implied contract is completely gone now. I mean, even prior to the portal, you were seeing that erosion taking place in terms of, kids sort of like, progressing up with some sense of, okay, like that job is mine once I become a junior or senior. But that right now, just the sheer volume of players going into the portal has just kind of blasted that all away.
Well, and I mean, you go back even to like a John Laskowski picking up being a sixth man on the IU team as part of Knight's recruiting class, that there's always this sort of thing where Sven Nader was the backup to Bill Walton and was probably the second best center in the country of his era.
Yeah.
And you go back all the way back to the 50s and the 60s, and that sort of recruiting over, or you got to beat up your spot. I mean, I think Lyndon Jones probably felt a little bad at times as his career was winding down because his utilization wasn't what he thought it would be, even what it was his freshman and sophomore years. I mean, he started seeing less and less playing time as that Cheney class, guys like Greg Graham, Chris Reynolds, Jamal Meeks, and then eventually a kid by the name of Damon Bailey comes in, and he's a freshman while, Lyndon's a senior. And I mean, you just kind of go through these examples of what's happened in the past that dissatisfaction is going to be there in any locker room, and how you handle it as a coach is, well, how do you work a kid that's been with you 4 years through that? And sometimes it may just be, now it's a matter of, and I think we've seen this. I think at Purdue, Mason Gillis lands at Duke. It's like, son, your time here is done. And maybe he decided, maybe Matt Payne. I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying that, both Gillis and Morton, take your last year. And, a kid like Paul Atkinson gets a Yale degree, and now then he gets a Notre Dame master's in business administration. Yeah. And that's the game got him there. And so the transfer is not always a bad thing, and B, something a kid necessarily wants, but it may be a situation where it just comes to mutual benefit, which kind of leads me to the last myth. And this is one that may get people going, what does he mean by this? Coaches hate the portal. And I know coaches say they hate the portal. The coaches say they hate lots of things. Coaches will say anything at any given time if it causes them consternation, grief, problems, or a lack of stability. Don't get me wrong on this. But I think in many respects, it's not that coaches hate the portal. They hate the portal when it hurts them, but they love the portal for what it can bring to them. Yeah. And I think it's a matter of, they may not like how it's going. They may not like how it's designed. But if they really wanted to kill the portal, coaches could find ways to do it. They could have underground understandings where if a kid leaves, Power 5 conference coaches could collude a little more closely. If they really wanted to kill it, they could do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't that long ago when conferences made those types of decisions. It wasn't that long ago when some schools in the Big Ten would refuse to release a grad transfer inside the conference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. If you think about it, that's from the coach's angle, obviously. I always kind of laugh in thinking about when you say that coaches don't like it. And I think there is some consternation, like you said, just because there is just so much upheaval that's taking place. But I kind of laugh at it thinking that the comparison where coaches said, well, I really liked it in the olden days when kids weren't going to the portal. And so you think about the number of times that coaches just up and leave a school when there's a better opportunity for them. And so now kids are basically granted the exact same rights and privileges that coaches had for all those decades. And so now coaches are like, wait a minute, the players are given exactly the same right to move to different schools that coaches get. Well, that's not
Right.
fair.
Right.
And, and also just like even thinking back, same little bit with like NIL. It's like, wait a minute, the only multimillionaires that are, people paid 600, six figures or $1 million that can leave whenever they want should be coaches. Players can't do that. So, so yeah, I think it's, I think water is finally finding its level in terms of the degree of market fairness, let's say, between coaches and players. And so, so yeah, I agree. There's logistical concerns about the portal, obviously for coaches that you can be sympathetic to, but I think there's some other elements of it that are not quite as sympathetic to the coaches' play.
And again, it's a thing of, do they really want to spend all the time they've been spending in that highly competitive, long distance, grueling march for 2-3 years with a high school player? And I think that's going to be the question as we're going forward, as to, do coaches really hate the portal, or are they going to find a more efficient way to kind of get their 5 new faces every year?
Yeah.
They're still going to do high school recruiting, but maybe the spoils of high school recruiting aren't going to be the same as they were for those high school seniors as they were even 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Where the promises are, hey, guess what? And if you're saying that to a kid, you better make good on it because of the portal. Like, we expect to see you playing a role immediately. And, am I going to start? Well, you're going to be darn near close to starter minutes. Look at our roster, sort of thing. I mean, you're going to have to kind of hold to that. So it changes it, because right now, Mike, I mean, according to verbal commits, when I checked it, I think it was yesterday, there was 1877 in the portal.
Jeez. Yeah.
And that's out of, I think Sam Story figured up 4,800. If you multiply the number of 362 Division I teams by 13 scholarships.
Yeah.
And I mean, I functionally use 4,500 because, like IU, a lot of teams don't carry. Some teams are only carrying 11.
Yeah, it's it's somewhere in the low to mid 4,000 probably. Yeah.
And so 40% of the players have entered the portal. And now the vast majority of them are coming out of smaller conferences. Maybe they're portaling after the end of their senior year they're entering the portal just for a chance maybe to go to a graduate program. Because we also know there's going to be an attrition rate of kids that are going to portal, and that's the end of their career.
Yeah.
I remember when Elliot Welmer, one of my favorite kids of all time, he played a couple years at St. Louis University. When he entered the portal after he was done at St. Louis with his degree. He didn't get picked up because he really wasn't able to play, but he still entered the portal. So his career ended with him in the portal, so to speak. Yeah. And it's nothing, that was back in the graduate transfer days. So guys, sometimes their careers end for a variety of reasons when they get put in there, or they go to another division of basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's where things kind of are now with the numbers. And as we're kind of looking at this, what are you seeing as teams are moving? What are we really kind of seeing this year?
Yeah, like in terms of the player movement, the numbers that I think you and I have shared is, and I think we'll get to this when we get into the next segment. But yeah, I've been pulling some stuff here and there, and I would say that early on that people maybe have had some like idea of like, okay, well, there's a magic number, in terms of like, what ideal like portal utilization is. And I think, as we'll discuss, there's just too much nuance, I think, to say that, okay, like there's like one exact spot that you should be like hitting. I think it's going to, maybe my theory right now is that it's probably going to be a little bit like the sweet spot. There's going to be sort of like a middle equilibrium point that's going to be sort of like the maximum, like, or say maximizing point that maybe teams should like operate on. And there's like a low end and a high end that maybe like where you start to lose some efficiency. So yeah, I think it's interesting just to note that because it's so early, because of the COVID year bubble and all these other things that are taking place simultaneously, I think we're just all in kind of wait and see mode. We're just like collecting data. Like you are, I am. I was talking to Annie Bottoms like a few weeks ago. He was sort of like looking at numbers. Tony is. So I think everyone is just in sort of data collection mode to gauge like, okay, well, where is this thing going? What are the correlations that are popping up in terms of teams that are performing well versus not performing well? So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've talked about the players, we talked about the coaches. Like one thing I'm sort of interested in, and we both kind of discussed that, is understanding like what the fan perspective is. So you think about like, back in the olden days, we used to think of basketball teams as cohesive crews of players like growing up together over like multiple years. You think about like you had said, like you had like the Buckner, May, Wilkerson crew, Woodson, Tolbert, Whitman came through next. Then it was like Alford and Thomas and Cheney, Graham, Reynolds. So it kind of resembled almost a narrative arc, these like, 4 or 5 year windows. And I was kind of compared it to a bit like, Band of Brothers, the HBO show, where you follow like a single cohort of guys through a coherent like beginning, middle, and end, which each season being like its own, let's say, like battle campaign. In the Portal era, it's a little bit less like Band of Brothers and maybe slightly more like one of our favorite movies, The Dirty Dozen.
Lee Marvin Strikes Back.
Exactly. Yeah, that's our second Lee Marvin reference now. Yeah, so in the Portal, you're not so much growing a squad slowly over time through multiple battles. You're kind of assembling a one-time motley crew of guys for a single one-shot mission behind enemy lines. And so in a way, I think for the fans, that can be like a little bit disorienting. I mean, the emotional investment that fans used to happen over, say, like a 3 or 4 year period. Now it's over, say, like a 5-6 month period for, some of these teams. So I think that's something we should also kind of follow, is not just the players, the coaches, but how the fans are kind of reacting to this, because this is a totally different environment than what they've been used to.
And I still think you may run into situations where you're going to have a couple seniors out of every cohort. It's a question of, and I go back to, again, 5 new faces. I know that we're thinking the median number is about 3, right, Mike? That when you start talking about how many transfers.
Yeah, it's about that.
That cut line is about that 3 level. We're going to talk about that a little later too. But I mean, you're going to have kids like Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal. You're going to have kids like, trying to think of an equivalent at, let's say, Purdue right now. Like I see a Braden Smith and a Fletcher Lawyer sticking around.
Yeah, might stick around. Yeah.
Time. Or Malik Hall up at Michigan State, where you're going to have guys that you're still going to have that, and especially when the COVID year ends, because we're saying 40% of the players are in the portal now. That's going to adjust, because the number of seniors is going to be cut drastically, just from a standpoint that you're just not going to have double the numbers. And for the last few years, you've had that added year of eligibility has popped up the number of potential players that have been in the game.
Yeah.
Next year, for the most part, that ends.
Yeah, exactly.
So what that does, it's going to be an impact. But where we stand right now is, you're seeing a lot of flux going on, and IU can take as many as I think 6, I believe.
Yeah.
And they're going to, I think, come close to hitting it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one stat and I posted this on Twitter/X, I think like a week or so ago, just give people like a sense of maybe of how the numbers or the ratios are kind of working. As of today, just 21 of the original 100, top 100 players from the 2022 recruiting class are slated to return for their junior year at the school they enrolled in as a freshman. So there's 20, so that means 79 players have moved on from their school that they originally committed to out of the top 100. Just the breakdown, like one and dones from the first year was 21, 22 kids of that group entered the portal after year 1. So after their freshman year, they bolted to a new school. There are just 2 kids that didn't make it to school at all for various reasons. 4 this year have declared for the NBA draft from that group, and 30 of them have entered the portal in this cycle. So 30 kids after the second year have jumped in the portal. So that literally just leaves 21 of the original 100 from the class 2 years ago that are going to return to their school for the third year. So that's quite an attrition rate compared to what we're used to.
Exactly. And I think for us, as we look at this, it's a matter of when guys go in and how we apply certain metrics to the portal. Like, I know that we talk a lot about BPM. We're going to talk about it here again. I mean, I'm also looking a lot of times at utilization rates and some other things, but this is why, again, you go for a portal player, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so what we thought we'd probably do here is just give a little bit of background in terms of kind of looking at this from the standpoint of, especially from coaches and programs, like, why would coaches, really want to use the portal? So we're using a slide deck that we used, I think, on, what was it, episode 4 from from our conversation about the sweet spot. And there's see, in this case, this one it was comparing Jared Butler from Baylor to both one and done players and like sub 100 recruits from that same class. And so just going to make sure I have this set up correctly. And also for the folks that are tuning in on just for the audio version, we'll post this in the show notes as well, so everyone can take a look at this as well. So remember in that discussion we noted from this prior episode that just to refresh, the disadvantages from, say, the one and done kids typically is that those kids have the uber talent, but they didn't stay long enough to hit the upper tip of the development curve for most players, that most players experience as juniors and seniors. And on the flip side, the kids that are rated, say, like, outside the top 100, they have the opposite problem. They stay until they're seniors, which is great, but they generally lack the talent to hit those upper tiers of the performance scale, like, box plus minus, 7 and above. The kids in that middle group, these sort of ideal pool of talent, they're the kids that have that elite skill level that can get to those upper tier BPM levels, but they aren't so talented that they bolt for the NBA after 1 year. So they kind of hit those upper levels as they mature into junior and senior year. So this example, again, we use Jared Butler from Baylor because he's one of those kids that was ranked in the 80s, and he bumped up into like 10, 12 and above in his second, his third year at Baylor. So if you look at this, this is sort of like the way college basketball used to operate before we had the portal. These were sort of like maybe the 3 main like sources, or at least categories of recruits that we had. Now, if you add portals into this equation, it starts to look like this. And this is where you see why coaches would see some benefit in bringing in portals. This example here, you have the exact same configuration with one and done kids typically topping out at, let's say, like, just above 6 BPM, sub 100s mostly not even getting to the 6 line, and the sweet spot kids, the 3380 kids typically starting below the line, starting out like 2, 3, or 4 BPM and then scaling up, but only scaling up after they have some experience. In these examples I just placed on the slide, you have, let's say, Tristan Newton, Terrence Shannon, Dalt Connect, Kalel Ware, some of the upper tier portals that have come into college basketball this past year. All these kids, when they arrived, were already above the one and done level. So basically, they are already performing well above, what you expect out of, let's say, a kid rated in the top 20 out of high school. And many of them, if you're talking about the kids that, let's say, come in as juniors that had like 2 years of experience, you see that in this case, Tristan Newton and Terrence Shannon, both in their first year at Illinois and UConn, respectively, they're around like 6 or 7. They're just, I think, right around 7 BPM. And then the next year, they're up, in double digits, 10 plus. So if you think about that, and Dalton Connect, I had like Dalton Connect and Kalel Ware here, and they'll also example. These are 1-year kids that came in. So obviously, those are kids they kind of knew that, okay, they're coming in and they're probably going to get drafted right away. They're both like Kalel Ware was like 8.5 and Connect was like, like 11 to 12. So you think about that in terms of like coaching, that is like a huge advantage to have, is that you can not only get kids that are really, really at the upper scale of the performance tier, but they're already experienced. They already played college basketball for a while. So they've already had like 2 or 3 years of experience going in, instead of having to wait that extra year or two, like you see in this case, this example with Jared Butler. You don't have to wait for the kid to go through the freshman year where he's at like a 2, 3, or 4, or then junior year or sophomore year, maybe where he's still around like, 5 or 6. These guys are bolting right up as soon as they come in the door. And so if you're a coach, that just completely changes the calculus that you have for your roster development over time.
It really does. And I mean, we're looking at when we're looking right now, you kind of look at those sub 100s, and a 4 BPM player is nothing to shirk at, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's moments, well, man, he's only a 4 BPM. Well, Lance Jones last year was like a 5.3 at Purdue, around that area. He's a little over 5. Lance Jones also came in, and this is, again, where you look at metrics. He came in from Southern Illinois and Carbondale, lower tier conference. He and Domask both, who ended up at Illinois, they both ended up kind of close on the BPM. You can't underestimate their impact on their programs, because they outproduced, I think, what their spot on the floor was doing the year before.
Yeah.
And the kicker with a kid like Lance Jones, who was about a 0, just a little shade in the negatives when he started, he was taking 31% of the shots when he was on the floor, playing like close to 80% of the minutes.
Yeah.
His time was a little more reduced at Purdue. His number of shots, he became a more efficient player because he was on a much better team. So I think the challenge, Mike, in some respects for coaches, is you're now scouting a lot of different kids. You're looking at a lot of different kids. You have your video guys working on it. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of Jonah Hill sitting in the video cave right now from Moneyball. Right?
Yeah, no, I can imagine just how much the game has grown. It truly, you can look at some of these lower tier conferences almost like minor leagues. It's like, hey, maybe I can find that kid way out west, like, 2,000 miles from my campus that maybe everyone has overlooked. So, yeah, that's totally good. That's a good metaphor for that.
Grad assistants, like tackling a coach is going, have you seen this kid? And, because I know that you have a connection to his AAU program. Have you looked at this kid recently? Or, I'm going to date in my 30s because I don't have time. I'm spending way too much time doing this in my, I'm married to Synergy right now. So I can't take you to dinner, honey, but you want to come to the house, and I'll show you what we're doing on the laptop, and I'm looking at 100 different kids and preparing dossiers on them.
Exactly. But that kind of raises an interesting question. I think we've kind of talked about that, like, sort of like this idea of these kids that are kind of hidden. I have wondered, like, I know Ryan Phillips and the AC Pod discussed this, and it's something I kind of thought about too, is if you're a pretty talented kid and let's say you're outside, let's say the top 80, and you're thinking about your options that are available to you coming out of high school, is it better to commit to a smaller school, smaller conference, hoping that you can kind of ball out there as a freshman and sophomore and transfer up, versus going to the big school right away and sitting the bench and just hoping to play the lottery and hope that you can, be lucky enough to outplay those guys? Because I was thinking about that even today. You saw that Aiden Mahaney kid from St. Mary's, and the treatment that he's getting from the big boys right now. I mean, I just saw he was at Kentucky. I think he was at UConn like last week. I mean, look, he came out of high school. He's like a 140 kid, ranking 6'3", good skill, not terribly athletic, kind of skinny, frankly. But he's, like a 14, 2-2 kind of player. Nothing really earth shattering. But today he's like, one of the hottest commodities in the portal. And a lot of it just because he went to a smaller school, played a lot, played well enough to like say that he's got, some experience. And now he's getting offers that a lot of the players that were even above him in his same class, and kids who I don't think are necessarily less talented than him, he's getting offers that they're not getting. So it kind of does raise that interesting question, like, in the future, are these kids going to start like going away from the larger schools as freshmen and just going to that lower tier school and hoping to kind of like, route their way up versus going to the big school and just hoping they can like, make hay and, because it does seem that the numbers seem to be tilting a little bit more towards that it might make sense to go to the smaller school first.
I think it's just a great question. And I think it's one that's worth watching. And I think as we go into segment 2, I think we're getting, I think at this point, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that process and particularly that impact on the sweet spot and how it's looking at this point in time, as well as, players, maybe the sweet spot's more of a moving target. So when we come back, we'll be discussing that here on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So, Bob, we were just talking about the portal in terms of its impact on teams and sort of the dynamics of player improvement. And you brought up the sweet spot, which is kind of the next place I was looking at from my own sort of like research. Like the next big project for me is the research is like, okay, how is the portal going to alter or change the sweet spot in terms of what are the national championship winning teams going to start looking like going forward if the portal increasingly becomes sort of like the monster that it is, especially that what's compared to where it started, let's say just like 2 years ago to where it is now. Looking back at again, this is the same slide deck that we're talking about in episode 4. Again, the goal of what you're trying to do as a program is to move as many kids as you can to sort of like the proverbial sweet spot on the XY axis of player performance in terms of the whatever metric you want to put. Box plus minus is the one I typically use. There are other ones out there. Oh, by the way, I will say, just as a side note, Bob, I'm pretty happy that my little scheme to get as many people to use box plus minus is finally starting to go off the bed. My inner Mr. Burns is like, constantly going excellent every time I'm seeing
BPM. I'm seeing BPM all over the place, and it's a great. If you're looking at just a quick analysis, it's beautiful because it does show. First off, it shows player improvement. It shows roles on teams. It shows also how a team is structured in many respects. Because if you're a low BPM dude, it may be you're still a pretty good ball player, but you need to be on a really bad team. So if everybody's at -8 and you're at 0.3, you're doing okay relative to your team's performance. And I'm looking at that player going, okay, let me take a look at his first step. Let me take a look at his shot release. Let's see how he plays on defense. Let's see what type of decisions he's making on the court. Yeah, I love that it's going. I love that we're seeing more and more people kind of using this as a quick hit. This kid's 5.4. This kid's a 0.3. Let's look at the 5.4.
Yep. No, it's I like it. I mean, let's be honest with you, that there are other ones in the sport that I like maybe even a little bit more. I mean, I can't wait till like measures like pi or Darko from the NBA start making their way into college basketball. Then, my insufferability for metrics will be,
Dude, you just look. You just sold me on this. Okay, listen, you just sold me on the Cadillac. I got the XT6. I got the extra row. I'm not trading in after 6 months, man. You cannot do this to me.
Yeah, but
I'm old.
I'll wait. Maybe someone out there will start.
Give me some time
for college basketball, but there's some interesting ones out there. But BPM for now, it's good stuff, and I do like it. So, yeah, but I won't throw that on you too quickly.
Oh, geez, I got a kid. I got stuff to do.
Yeah, but but again, like BPM is a pretty good like short metric, and again, it's one that I find good use out of. So in this case, we're talking about the sweet spot again. Is that trying to get again the two measures that you typically see, it's experience and performance, and so moving as many players to sort of like that top right hand corner of the XY axis of experience and performance is what you're looking for. If you look at where things have gone with the portal so far, I was just looking the other day, and one of the one of the measures outside of BPM is just simply like who are the first team all conference players in, let's say, Power Six, because not everyone can be an All-American, but like some of the better players that are national championship caliber contributors are obviously all conference type players.
Yeah, and
of the Power Six conference teams, or Power Six conferences just in general, 64% of the first team all conference players this year in 2024 were from the portal. And that's a pretty striking number considering that.
Can you say that again, please? I want to make sure.
64% of the first team all conference players in Power Six conferences were from the portal.
Almost 2/3 of
just
the top
2/3,
30 players, right, in the Power conferences.
Exactly. So that leaves just 36% of the players that were not portals that were that reached first team all conference level. So again, if, when we're thinking about this in terms of like sourcing as just a matter of like, if we're looking at this almost like we're a corporation and we're saying, okay, we need as many people that can hit like a certain level of performance. If 2/3 of them are coming from, let's say, a very specific pool of talent, then obviously we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at that particular pool compared to the other one. So when people are asking, well, why are coaches going after portal players with such, enthusiasm and alacrity? Well, it's because of things like this. I was looking also the Evan Minya's like BPM. Go ahead.
And I'll finish this point because I think my question. I have a question here in a second that might kind of just clarify this a little more. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I was looking also on like Evan Minya's top 50. He's got his own like box plus minus metric, and about right around 50% of his top players in the top, let's say top, I think it was top 100. Half of them were from the portal as well. So you kind of think about this, that it's just increasingly clear that the portal is just going to become a regular source of talent, not just for everyone, but especially for sort of like the upper tier teams.
If you're looking for that. But again, one of the things that we're not really sure about, and this is the hard part of this in projection, we still have the COVID year kids who may be artificially inflating this number a little bit. And
I guarantee you they are. Yep.
I mean, it's a matter of, and again, I go back to 5 new faces. If you're 5 new faces, if you're picking 5 portals every year, are you completely, you can't really divorce yourself out of the high school recruiting world, because first off, you may be losing contacts with kids, contacts with programs that can help you down the road. Yeah. So it's more of a long play game.
Exactly. Well, you need those contacts even to operate in the portal, because if you're not recruiting if you complete pull-up high school, then yeah, you're not going to be able to contact the high school coaches and the other contacts that actually know those kids when they came through the first place.
How do you tamper with the kid if you don't know the kid, or you don't know the people around the kid?
Exactly. Yeah.
You're just cold calling, and at that point, it's easier to report you for that sort of thing. That guy's creeping me out, that sort of thing. But I think there's also the thing. I think there's the thing of what you're just not. I think that still isn't insignificant, because if you're looking for guys to just plug in, and you're also looking for guys to plug in with your guys that fit, the guys that are kind of going along. Like, you look at IU, Malik Renew is a great example. Trey Galloway is a great example. Anthony Leal's a great example. Gabe Cups. You got these guys that are here. They're definitely, in the program for multiple years.
Yeah.
But I think that you're bringing up a great point with this, that it's like, hey, there's a whole other world out here that's growing in influence.
Yeah, no, and it's also I always say that with anything with roster construction, that's always typically about balance. I mean, I get in these funny debates with different people where it's like some people say, well, the portal's nothing, and we shouldn't really do anything in the portal. Look what Purdue's doing; they don't use the portal and they're fine. Other people, they're on the other sort of extreme end and say like, well, we should just do nothing but portal and just forget high school. We'll just keep sweeping kids in. Typically, I think it's going to be a balance in terms of like what you're looking to have that is going to actually like net results without like having a lot of the drawbacks of going to either extreme. I mean, look at like the right balance to me. You can just look at the championships. Look at UConn. They had Newton, Spencer, Diarra as portals. Yep. Well, Caravan, Klingon, Castle, and Johnson were like upper tier high school recruits. I mean, UConn still had sort of like the old school, like, 7 top 80 recruits that were mostly like in this, the 33 sweet spot that, I typically identify. But their top 2 scores were Spencer and Newton, who were portals. And so my focus in the portal anymore is on quality, not quantity. Right. I think it's less about like how many you take in per se versus how good are the ones you're actually bringing in? Like, where do they fit? Are they actually like really adding something to your roster that you don't have? And, we can even think about like how like the 87 championship at IU, like you could look at Garrett and Smart almost like portal editions. Like, they had this core of players, and it's like all they were really missing was an athletic point guard and a like big. And a true big that could like, shot block and so that was like almost like the perfect analogy to like what I think teams who are going to compete for championships might look like, is that they're going to be kind of a set core of upper tier players, but they just need to add like maybe 2, maybe 3 like upper tier guys to go with them that just fill in holes. So. And
there may be a law, you're suggesting a law of diminishing returns on a total portal haul, that when you start going over a certain number, you may start finding yourself in a position where that, if that it's going to be harder and harder to find guys who are that level of contributor when you start going past 3, 4, or 5 in a season. You look at UConn last year; they picked up 1. You look at, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But I think it's this idea with the sweet spot with these. If you're still hitting the sweet spot in those recruits, and you're still hitting the sweet spot in your portal additions, your box plus minus average, you're trying to find those guys who are definitely you want an average in that 8 range, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you generally want the bulk of your starters to be 7, 8 plus if you want to compete for a championship.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do, as we found with one and dones, and it's really hard to do if you're kind of outside the sweet spot to be competitive.
Yeah,
in fact, you're not going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in this slide, this last one I'll up here is. It just kind of like illustrates that, like you look at the starter averages for national championship teams in recent years, Kansas, UConn, Virginia, Villanova, UNC. Yeah, they're all basically, around between like 7 to 10 in terms of the BPM average. So that's basically the area you want to aim for in terms of like your players their sort of like upper limit. And so if you have portals that are just coming in droves that are able to hit that mark. When you see like, guys like Aaron Estrada, Mark Sears, Connect, all these players you saw that were like kind of balling out during the tournament, you understand why coaches are going after them. And that will probably be something that will continue into the future.
Right. And that high end of the market, I think, is really the big question as we go a little further into the market and we start talking about, well, is this a proactive choice? When is it a proactive choice versus a reactive decision? I think oftentimes it is based on your circumstances. Like if you've had a rough season the year before, or if you're trying to fight off a regression. Like I think the regression conversation becomes a little more interesting with the portal in play. Dan Hurley has been active, to say the least.
Yeah.
Bill Self has been active, to say the least. These guys are staving off the going from 25 to 30 win type rosters, trying to avoid going to that 20 to 25 win roster.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use the portal maybe to kind of buttress that, to kind of prevent it. At the same time, there's a risk reward with it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's, I think we saw, was it back in February, there was that Twitter post where it said, all the teams, these number of teams that took 6+ portals were having bad years. And, I saw that. I mean, I thought it was directionally correct, but my spidey sense also kind of wonders, like, I don't know if that's a correlation doesn't equal causation kind of problem in terms of how it's like presented. And I think, when we were kind of looking into it, and this is, we'll pull up some numbers I think that you had put together that's really good. Portal usage really does kind of vary based upon circumstances, because not every team that is using it the same way and for the same reasons. Like, like you said, their teams and coaches might find themselves in a place where, oh man, I just came into this job and my team got gutted by players leaving.
Right.
What do I do next? Do I just wait, go through the normal high school route and hopefully maybe after 3 or 4 years be finally competitive, or do I really go to the portal and really try to get this thing going quickly? So it's the dynamic is very interesting.
And yeah, that's sort of replacing an entire roster, or the need to do so. Like I was looking at kind of the win totals to kind of start. What was there was there definitely a difference if you were 0 to 50? If you're in that sort of, your team's not very good, you're at 0 to 15 wins, you're a sub 500 team. And average transfers are at 3.72 between those programs. And that includes Air Force, who's not going to take a transfer.
Yeah.
The United States Air Force Academy, much like the United States Military Academy or Navy, are not going to take guys as transfers. They're going to, they may have guys leave as transfers, but they're not going to be adding anybody.
Yeah.
Well, you look at that sub 500 team at 3.72, and then you look at teams that were 26 wins, which includes Alabama in this metric. Mm-hmm. And you had 2.75 as the average across the board. Yeah. Now you had some programs that, again, but the range was interesting too, that most of them, the range was really kind of fairly stable across the board, that you had a ceiling of 8 on all these programs, 8 transfers total. Colorado State, I think, was the 26 win, 8. That was the one, and that was a coaching change. Because I put the Mountain West in. So these are the power conferences along with the Mountain West, because it was a multi-bid conference this year. So I thought they were interesting to look at.
Yeah.
There's a law of diminishing returns also, though, with win range, with average wins, that when you start noticing that if you're a 15-win team, you're going to see a good bump. If you're a 16 to 20 team, those teams saw a good bump. Those 20 to 21 and up teams saw a declination. But they were already kind of in those areas. So what the portal does offer, I think, in bulk, without considering the quality of players, it allows you maybe to level up. So if you were not a tournament team the year before at 15 wins, you may go to 17, 18 and get your NIT bid. You had a couple teams that actually leveled up into the tournament. If you're that 16 to 20 range and you pick up that 3 or 4 transfer number, you're seeing more and more programs that actually go from being a non-NCAA team into being an NCAA team. But and then you take a look at a team like Alabama, who was again one of the best teams in the country last year. They picked up a few transfers. They kind of reimagined some things, and they went from being a 30 plus win team to a mid 20s team, or like that team this year.
Yeah.
But they're still in that 26 plus group, but they ended up going to their first Final Four in program history.
Yeah. And then they had 2 of the top 10 portal transfers, and
Right.
Nelson and Estrada. So yeah, again, it kind of goes with the
Quantity and quality.
Quantity versus quality.
And it's a thing that, and again, they also made some practice. They brought some consulting in. We'll talk about that in future episodes too.
Yeah.
They reevaluated a couple things they were doing, especially defensively, and again realized they had to be patient. They were playing for a tournament less than they were playing for maybe getting the highest or getting a really high seed,
Yeah.
and they were in a bracket that they were able to attain that.
Yeah.
But is it a lot of times it is more of a reactive decision because situations kind of get out of your control. You look at those 0 to 15s, the team that really kind of goes, the team that lost those additional 7 losses, that was DePaul.
Yeah.
And they were a high transfer team. They kind of reshaped their roster. I think they had 6, come to think of it. And they went from there to the end, and now you have a coach that gets fired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at the fact of guys oftentimes maybe using the portal also to maybe try to save their position, or as we like to say, rebuild their chip stack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think when I was looking at it, I just went in like a few weeks ago, and I was just looking at all the teams that had like 5+. And I was just like, extracting them and taking a look at like their numbers. And you're right. It was oftentimes guys that came into a new position after the last coach got fired, or coaches that are trying to avoid that situation in terms of like being the coach that gets fired and trying to just throw as many portals and just hoping that, okay, if I just rebuild my roster, this one last shot before they kick me out the door, maybe this will work. I mean, Kevin Keats did that. I mean, Keats had 7 transfers. And obviously it took a little bit of a miracle or two for that to work out for him. But yeah, I mean, that's like a perfect example of a guy that says, okay, I've got nothing to lose. Let's just like throw all the chips in the middle, just redo the roster in total, and then see if this works. So yeah, I would say that maybe you can look at, and obviously we'll kind of measure this as time goes by, but maybe it's something that the portal just creates a little bit of volatility, but it can be like good volatility. It can actually be like a high, it can be a risk, but the risk can actually, pay off more than maybe, like the more traditional model did, and just waiting for a certain number of high school kids to grow up.
And it's not always going to be transferable one year to the next, because our portal teams, our portal darling teams last year were Missouri and K-State, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
They took 5 portals. K-State took 5 portals. Missouri had 17 more losses. K-State had 7 more losses. I think that put them in a position where, K-State did, neither team made the tournament like they did the year before. And so there is that. You're right. The volatility can be positive. It could also be very negative. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the danger of. And I think that's one thing I like about what Mike Woodson's doing by not just going with kids who are in their last year, by picking up Rice and Carlisle. That's a good hit for him to have an experienced backcourt as sophomores. They may not be at the level where they're going to be at juniors, but you can definitely tell that they're going to be players that can grow in their contributions over a period of time. We should see bumps in productivity just based on what they have around them. But that's kind of the question mark coming in of, how much utilization are they going to get versus the rest of the roster. I think Tristan Newton's a great example of this too. If you can, it's not just about a 1-year rental oftentimes. Sometimes it is a 2-3 year commitment that you're making to a player inside the portal. Yeah. And oftentimes it's why you're looking at, well, who's on the hot seat to see which players we may be able to get available to us.
Exactly. It's I think you and I think we popped on the what was it we were on AC radio show that one time the day Liam McNeely bolted away from
Decommitted.
IU and we perfect timing for us to jump in and when everyone was in such a great mood that night. But yeah, I think when we were talking that night, and this is before the portal really got going. I think you and I had both said something.
We were still in the season. I mean, they were in the middle of that five-game win streak.
Exactly. Yeah, that was
around
that time in March, and I think we'd both intimated to some degree that okay, the path forward was definitely steep, but here's what I think Mike Woodson should probably look at multi-year transfers, not just 1-year guys, but
right.
Because of some of the roster imbalance that had happened with IU, that taking some guys that have 2, maybe 3 years left for them could stabilize things, especially in the backcourt, which has been, that's obviously been kind of a bugaboo for the team for a while. So yeah, I think you're right. I think Woodson, once the portal closes and we know where things are, we'll probably have a little bit more of a deeper dive into what IU did. But obviously, so far, I think they've done a really good job, and I think not again just from the talent standpoint, but you can tell there's definitely a very coherent plan about getting guys that fill in very specific holes in terms of roster needs.
Exactly, and even taking 6 with the quality of kids that you're taking in that situation, you may also find that there be maybe a portal, or at least one portal or so. Could you go ahead and just leave that up? So I'm going to talk about the first year coaches too.
Absolutely.
But you look at that sort of add-on that you could always add, give a kid a 6th year. I mean, I'm interested in Alex Hemingway out of the Newburgh, Evansville area.
Yeah.
I think it also sends messages across the board throughout the state that shows, Indiana's, they're still that we're still looking at in-state players, that this program is still committing to in-state players. Luke Goody was another great example of that.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think you brought up the first-year coach, and I wanted to talk about that briefly, that the best path for an incoming coach, we've always talked about the 3-year process.
Yeah.
And really, it's a matter of year 1 is almost a throwaway because you're building your recruiting contacts. Year 2, you get them in as freshmen. You're usually playing a lot of freshmen at that point in time. Think Tom Crean in the early years. Think Archie Miller year 2 sort of things, where there's a lot of bumps in the road, a lot of potential pratfalls. Yeah. By year 3, and at this point, you better have that really good class in year 2 or year 3 coming in, because you get about a 6-year window to work with. And you're hoping, if you're going to make the jump into becoming an elite level program, a top 5%, top 2% program, you're going to need to make sure that those first 2 or 3 recruiting classes are high level. But it's more of a slow cooker.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing with the portal, there's a bit of a microwave effect. And you see Chris Beard up here when that first year coach, where I think he took 6 and improved greatly. Now there are some examples here where I think the situation in which you're inheriting can make a difference as to your result. If you're going into Penn State after Micah Shrewsbury and you're basically bringing in 6 or 7, I think you're bringing in 8 players in that case. Penn State brought in 8. You're going to see it. You may say, well, that's 7. They had 7 additional losses year over year. But that could have been a lot worse had he had to go through a year, kind of like Tom Crean's first season in Indiana.
Yeah, exactly.
So everything's kind of put into a relative sort of area. Now, when you look at the transfer ranges of 2 on this, that's a program like Providence, who brought an internal guy in to replace Ed Cooley when he left.
Yeah.
So he already knew his roster, so he's going to look like a program that's replacing he's going to look more like. He's going to look more like, let's say, an Iowa than he's going to look like an Arkansas in the transfers.
Yeah.
Same thing's very true about Syracuse after Jim Boeheim. They brought an internal guy in. Micah Shrewsbury going to Notre Dame. Mike Bray retires. It may not have been fully. I think he was done. It was his time had passed. He's ready to move on. But unlike Matt Painter, who had to bring in the baby boilers, Micah Shrewsbury may get a bit more of a leg up with the portal to get his recruiting fired up to get the team that he wants. That's that low end of the transfer range. But Rick Pitino and Chris Beard both came in guns a-blazing with high levels of transfers. And you'll notice, if you see the chart, you'll see this. But like, if you're a first-year coach, this year the first-year coaches, there were 12 of them. Their KenPom difference average was 1.6. They had average wins a win and a half higher than the team had it before. That's accounting for both West Virginia and Penn State, who had large numbers of losses jumping in.
Yeah.
As the years go on, though, what we're noticing, like if you're in that 2 to 5, you're in that first year range. Those teams, again, first year coaches took an average of 5.25. By years 2 and by years 5 and 2 to 5, it's 3.23. By the time you get to those 11 plus guys, they're under 2, just barely under 2. Mm. So there may be some of these things with the older coaches, I think, maybe less responsive. Or, as you're suggesting, if you're looking at a Matt Painter, he's looking for a Lance Jones.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is seems so circumstantial. I mean, it's like, I always kind of wonder, as I've said, I think I said in a prior pod, that your portal utilization can be seen as an indicator of other things rather than a strategy. I always say like circumstance versus strategy is like a distinction that people need to think a little bit more about. I think I ran the numbers, was it just a few weeks ago, looking at the last 3 NCAA tournaments, looking at the averages of the top seeds. I think like 1 seeds of the last 3 tournaments averaged like 2 transfers. 2 seeds, it was like 2.3, and 3 seeds, I think it was like 2.5. So they're all under the national average, obviously. And so you can look at that and say, oh, well, we if I'm coming into a new school, I should just do 2 like UConn. The problem is that you're not in UConn's shoes right now. UConn gets to do that because they already have stability that you do not have. So it's it's looking at this from the standpoint of the starting point of where these programs exist in the moment, not as if they're all starting at the same starting line and that they all just like get to make the same decision and have that exact same results as these teams that are they're already like well established and are already going to consistent numbers of Final Fours. So yeah, go ahead.
Didn't we see that in regular recruiting also? Like,
sure, yeah.
Recruiting that you'd have like a big class and then fill-ins.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's a lot of the dynamics you see in the portal are showing up, or like I said, a lot of the dynamics you saw in high school recruiting are showing up in the portal as well. I mean, you think about like the unequal distribution of talent in the portal is just as bad as it was in high school. You see a lot of the better teams are getting the better portal guys. So, it's like the Gini coefficient is showing up the same way in one as was showing in the other. So the rich are still getting richer in the portal as was happening in the high school ranks. So yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, like, what's the best path for an incoming coach? Like I'm thinking if I were to school that was really patient, let's say a school that didn't win a lot, I would probably load a little bit more on high school than maybe if I were at a Power 5 school with a lot of expectations. Months back, I did a study where I was looking at some of the coaches that had really poor performance early on in their tenure and survived. That were able to go, let's say, past the typical like 3, 4, 5 year honeymoon window, didn't win a lot, and still, were retained by their school. Almost all those examples were guys that were at schools that didn't have a lot of winning historically. I think the example I tend to cite is Bill Carmody at Northwestern. I think his first 8 seasons, I think the most wins he had any one year was like 16, but most of the rest of them is like, 12, 13, 14. But, he survived because he was at Northwestern. Now, if you did that at another school with higher expectations, like if you were down the road at Champaign, Urbana, yeah, he wouldn't survive. So I would
Or
say
your
that
Todd
that's
Leclaire
one
at Iowa.
variable I would
Yeah.
take. What's that?
Or your Todd Leclaire at Iowa.
So yeah, exactly. Or yeah, there's a host of guys that that would kind of fit that same category. So yeah, that's probably one thing I would look at is like if you're trying to figure out what's the right mix. I think it really depends upon how quickly you need to get up to speed. If you need to get up to speed quickly, then you have to probably go portal heavy. If you have a little bit more time, a little longer time horizon than maybe some of your rivals, then maybe going with a little bit heavier on a high school approach would not necessarily be the worst idea.
And knowing full well you may still take a bunch of portals your first year, just because your roster could be an absolute disaster. Like right now, John Calipari doesn't have a team. Mark Pope walked in; he doesn't really have a team. They're gonna have to get players from somewhere. So
yeah,
exactly. There's a lot more of this that we're gonna talk about, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, as we said. So when we come back, we're gonna wrap this thing up and talk a little bit about what's next.
Yep. Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Motes. So, Bob, that was fun.
This is, what's great about this is everybody's going to get a chance to kind of join us on this a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's like everything, we get stuff wrong. We all the time, and especially in the early stages of this, we also don't know exactly what the questions are. I mean, I would say one thing that you guys out there could do to help, hit us up on the Discord or the Substack in the assembly, the assembly call community. Hit us up with DMs. Talk to us a little bit about what questions you're having, what things you're seeing, because the help that you can do over the course of this next, these next few months, as you're kind of looking at this from however you're looking at it, it is a problem. And when I say a problem, it's like a math problem. It's like it's a dilemma. It's some sort of way of us looking at this. And we just encourage the community to kind of be like, okay, let's talk about this more in depth. We've seen a couple really good ones on the Discord recently, where we've talked about analytics inside 3-point shooting, for example, and those questions of, well, how has the game evolved in this direction? Same thing's true here. We've had a couple questions, just kind of hitting this up a little bit more as to, even with individual players or individual player development, how that factors into some of this. And we're going to be hitting a bunch of these topics from now until tip off next season, or when we really start talking about, okay, what, as well as what we learned this season, as well as in the last few post-COVID, as to where the game's really going.
Yeah.
So Mike, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, well, like you said, it's I think what's going to be interesting about this is that almost all the other episodes we've had so far were sort of like backward looking. Is that, okay, this is what has happened in the past, and we can sort of like say with some high degree of confidence that, okay, here's what the correlations are. Here's the patterns that exist. With this, it's different because obviously we don't really know. It's kind of like we're right in the middle of the process. So we're really at sort of the gathering data stage, in preparation for the theories and hypotheses of what the portal is going to look like. So I think you're right, and we do encourage everybody to reach out if you have very specific questions that are measurable about the portal that you want to have answered. Bob and I can certainly take a look and see if we can scrounge some data together for people.
And we're going to be getting a little bit of help on our next episode, right?
Yes, exactly. We'll be taking a little bit of a journey. On episode 10, we'll be joined by our pal, Tony Adranya, and he'll be there to talk about, Tony Adranya. He's going to give us a little bit of a discussion about his path to becoming a young guru in the sport, but mostly we'll be talking about analytics, which is sort of like Tony's wheelhouse. We'll be going over, I think, how he looks at analytics, and also just getting into some of the maybe some of the things that he's presented recently, through Twitter and also on his through his great
film room
that he does with the Back Home Network. So yeah, that's definitely will be exciting. So I look for that another 2 weeks or so. He'll be joining us, so that should be fun.
Talking about that somewhat tense relationship sometimes between analytics and schematics, pretty much is what we're looking at here, right?
Exactly.
Kind of like Ordinary People that had the great Mary Tyler Moore and Donald Sutherland in it.
Exactly.
Just that very uneasy marriage that is on the rocks and can sometimes get blown apart just by something not that kind of just takes you off kilter. In that case, it was tragic, and most of the as Bob Knight said, it's basketball, it's not a tragedy. But speaking the great Donald Sutherland, who was also in
The Dirty Dozen.
Dirty Dozen.
Yeah. It's amazing how many things loop back, to how many times we can have multiple references, within a show. So yeah, I was just thinking.
Go ahead.
I was just I was thinking just the other day, and you and I are always sticklers for casting in these movies. But have you ever wondered how like a diminutive stage singer with almost zero acting credits like Trini Lopez ends up in a Bronze War film like The Dirty Dozen? Like just
I'm going to put
how
it.
did that happen?
I saw a movie where there was a horse involved. We've talked about it before, where the Godfather sent a message.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Is like,
for this.
I know we've reached our quota on references to the Godfather, but truly that is like a Johnny Fontaine scenario. Like, what horse had to lose their head to convince the brass at MGM to place the 100-pound band singer next to Jim Brown and Charles Bronson in a violent, sweaty war film?
I'm going to throw this out. I was looking at this today, and IMDb, one of the greatest sites ever invented. Do you know what label Trini Lopez recorded for? Do you know of Reprise Records?
Reprise
Records was the label started by Frank Sinatra.
Oh, that is too perfect. Like literally the actual Johnny Fontaine that there was referencing.
Johnny Fontaine, yeah, exactly. I looked at that. I'm laughing. My wife, my kid, look at me half the time like, "What is this guy? What was he finding it so damn amusing?" It's like, oh yeah, I can't wait to drop this one because it's Johnny.
I would react to that.
I'm like, oh man, it's Sinatra. And I mean, you always have the question, like in The Longest Day, they put in Paul Anka and they put in Fabian because dad was going to have to drag his daughters and his wife to the movie. So, you're going to put Robert Ryan in these movies because Robert Ryan's good looking and kind of looks like, something out of the Thornbird or whatever, because not everybody wants to look at Ernest Borgnine and Lee Marvin. Or George Kennedy and Lee Marvin. Ernest Borgnine was in the made-for-TV version, if I recall correctly. But
that's true.
I mean, the one where they tried to kill Hitler. So that whole thing, what you're talking about, which is the casting of this, it's always just like you got to find 12 guys that can fit the role. I mean, okay, Cassavetes is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Charles Bronson. Anytime you do an ensemble film like that, you got to bring in Bronson, just because of. Just he can work with anybody and that personality, and he really was an amazing actor. But then you throw in Jim Brown.
Yeah, well, the greatest football players ever lived. Yeah,
and he showed it while dropping the grenades down the pipes. I mean,
yeah, exactly. That if you watch that run, looked like a legit NFL player doing that. Like most guys cannot do it that fast.
No, I mean you're rooting for him like you're come on, make the goal line. Get it. Oh, at the 2. It was
exactly. And also terrible. Remember, like the bad stereotype is the requisite number of English actors that had to play German officers in those World War II movies of the 50s and 60s.
Not as bad as Hogan's Heroes, but it was where that was a whole different conversation. But very true that it's like.
Yeah, it was like so prevalent. You think back then it was like I mean, you almost think it was like a back end deal FDR snuck into like the Lend-Lease Act with Churchill. It's like, okay, Winston, you get the 20 Clemson class destroyers. In exchange, we get the 16 air bases in the West Indies. Plus, Laurence Olivier and Al Guinness will be requisitioned by MGM to play members of the German High Command.
More times than not, and part of it also was like, well, they're seeking out roles because you only do Shakespeare so many times before people are like, I want a movie with Fabian in it. Can we get an Elvis movie? I mean, if we got Viva Las Vegas playing up against King Lear, I'm thinking I'm really going to want to. I want to take the kids are going to want to go see Viva Las Vegas. It's just how that was working.
I'm just trying to think of what that conversation with the agent must have sounded like. It's like, look. I know the Luftwaffe bombed your theater district in London during the war, but you're the only actors from Allied nations that can actually pull this off. I mean, no one looks at Maurice Chevalier and sees Hermann Goering. So
German. No, but you can, Anthony Hopkins, you can play Hitler. I know you can figure this out. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, that was fun.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap this puppy up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. So Tony will be joining us episode 10. Take a look out for that. We'll be posting that probably on the Twitters and social media in the coming days. So this endless conversation was Bob. Go ahead.
Real quick, special thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and the sounds, and John Ringer for the design, ringdesign.com, and appreciate their feedback as well through our work.
Exactly. Yep. Be sure to check out all the great Back Home Network content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Weemuth.
I'm Bob Motes.
He's Bob Motes. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.